Hello and welcome for today's program. I'm Onur from SALT. I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for today's conversation between Ayşe Köklü and Vicki Kirby. This event is happening under the study groups program
It's
series
7 o'clock.
Organized by SALT. No problem. This is an online open part of the Ayşe Köklü's workshop under the study groups. She will give more information later about the workshop. And for the ones who are missing this online broadcasting, the video will be available on SALT's YouTube channel afterwards. Thank you again for joining us. Now I'm giving the word to Ayşe for further information.
Thank you, Onur. Thank you, everyone joining us today from all sorts of time zones. It's evening in Sydney, afternoonish in Istanbul, Turkey, and late morning in London. Thank you, SALT, for bringing us together, especially Sezin, Onur, and Mustafa, and the bird behind Mustafa's background, which makes this session much more pleasurable.
Channel afterwards. Thank you again.
Sorry. This talk, as Onur mentioned, is part of the study group series I'm running called Döndüğünce, which translates English as best as much as a language the tongue can do. And this is the first public program of the study group. I thought it would be helpful to give a bit of the context of how Vicki's work and presence here relates to it. A couple of months ago, I was reading an article titled Agency by the Canadian scholar Vanessa, Indigenous Studies scholar. There was a line there that stayed with me. Agency has erroneously become exclusive to humans, thereby removing non-humans agency from what constitutes a society. And I remember immediately making a note to myself, also language. And then I went on to thinking and noting human exceptionalism, the long tradition relating to human language. If I could see your faces, I would ask you to raise your hand if you remember hearing this sentence being told to you. I will first say it in Turkish because that's how I was told. İnsanı diğer canlılardan ayıran en büyük özellik dildir. Yeah, I wish I could see you and I would have loved to see your answers. But basically it translates to English as the most unique attribute separating humans from non-humans is language. And in this regard, I started thinking about the study group focus. The non-human and human in language. But after a while, I realized a blind spot in my research. I was still accepting language in the way that I was used. I was sticking to the binaries of non-human and human. And this is where Vicki actually came in. I was trying to find other people who were doing work in this field. And I was doing the work posthumanism, language, matter, agency. And then I found the point Vicki's talk she gave at in Berlin. And I reached out to her because she really pushed my understanding of what language is, removed it from that sacred place and made it much more gentle. And it's an honor now to have her here to read us an article that she has written a few years for the Triennale. The session consists of Vicki reading the article she's written, Wild Allusions. Vicki, the sound is breaking up from time to time. Okay, we will fix it. Anyway, so Vicki is going to be reading an article she has written. It will take around 35 to 40 minutes. And afterwards, there will be a chance for you to submit questions to YouTube, who Onur will be sending it my way, so I will make sure to bring them up to Vicki. I think me and Vicki decided we're not doing the usual achievements, accomplishments kind of intro for Vicki. It's very, it will be online and you will find it. Plus, it's more important that her inspiration is here with us and we will be witnessing it through the reading of her article. So without further ado, over to you, Vicki, and we will look into the sound issue.
Okay, thanks, Ayşe. And I'd just like to thank SALT, but in particular, Ayşe for contacting me and organizing this. I'm very happy to be doing it. I have often wondered about those expressions that emphasize the singularity. Oh, you've just done something. Wait a minute.
I've just started sharing the screen.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I've got to
And whilst we're doing, can I ask Mustafa a favor? I love the sound of the birds, but I think sometimes it's hard to hear Vicki as well. I wonder if you could mute yourself, if there's a way. Right. We will see. Okay. Are we ready, Vicki?
Okay. I think whenever you put it on the screen, I have to go back and find mine.
Oh.
I've often wondered about those expressions. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll zoom in the meantime.
I've often wondered about those expressions that emphasize the singularity of a particular moment in time and space, a moment that lived experience has seized upon and held close, senses alert as its significance is savoured or endured. Or perhaps the punctum of the here and now is more impersonal and fluid, stretching across years or even decades. We see this when we isolate particular styles or aesthetics, when we identify historical periods or epochs, and when we attribute these moments with a degree of coherence which, if not quite pegged down from start to finish, remains identifiable nevertheless. In short, whatever the contents of this temporal and spatial envelope, subjective or impersonal, we believe that something was present even as the afterlife of its passing generates debate and uncertainty about its exact identity. This way of thinking enables social communication and even our understanding of self and justice. What we perceive and experience works as a touchstone in determining what is true and real. I was there, this happened to me. Our society places exceptional emphasis on individual experience, and yet the appeal of the self-evident and our faith in perception as a direct record of what has taken place ignores the extraordinary complexity, the vagaries and interpretive play that sensate life enacts. I say ignores, but suspect the word disavows is a more accurate description, because friends who have shared our experiences can dispute even our most heartfelt recollections. Don't we all just sometimes concede a slight degree of uncertainty, some apprehension that our stories are not entirely our own? A fragment from a novel or media grab that held our attention, observed behaviours that provoke empathy or revulsion, distant rememberings animating a current experience, and the moire pattern of these confections become the felt energy of my story. Unsurprisingly, the artifice of memory's dynamic borrowings and blendings usually fail to shake our trust in perception. Juries, for example, favour eyewitness evidence more than any other, even though testimonies given in good faith are responsible for most wrongful convictions. Faced with such stark outcomes and the weight of their implications, it is difficult to believe that we are not entirely present to ourselves. Although memory is disturbingly plastic, it would be something of a stretch to admit that we are not witness to our own lives. Yet, isn't this the implication here? When credible evidence of how the world works is significantly out of sync with what makes sense, we tend to trust our perceptions and downplay the discrepancy. How else can we retain a sense of self, that sovereign sight that anchors personal integrity and responsibility? Although the amnesia of self-undoing is prerequisite to being ourselves, we are reluctant to interrogate the irreconcilable aspects of our own manufacture. But let's pursue this unsettling insight about the precarity of our identity a little further and consider why this particular truth escapes the lesson of its own reckoning. If we concede that a meta-truth, a sort of God's eye view of absolute objectivity, trumps the mistaken perceptions and on-the-ground experiences of subjective life, haven't we deferred some hard questions about objectivity and our faith that somewhere truth and reality remain unshaken? What anchors any of our interpretations and observations? Even if we look to the sciences and related forms of empirical research for an antidote to previous misguided understandings, these bodies of scientific knowledge are not immune from the dynamic of refutation and correction. A certain fact will morph over time into something more nuanced and qualified, even acquiring the status of a mistake in many cases. History tells us that the error's correction will in turn succumb to a fall from grace or significant challenge sometime in the future. It seems that truth's only constant is its ability to change again and again. I want to pause here to underline that this muddle over how we determine the truth of the matter has been a quandary for centuries, if not millennia. Its latest iteration in what has come to be known as new materialism, a contemporary movement with broad interest, provides another opportunity to better understand its recalcitrance. First, new materialism's identity remains something of a question because the jostling positions that fall under its umbrella understand the nature of matter very differently. Anticipating that matter will prove a curious touchstone and with little space to conjure with, I've tried to introduce something of its elusiveness. What can we trust and rely upon, and why? Need matter be something independent of what we consider not matter? Indeed, can we invest in the independence of anything? A particular critical theory, event, person, significant memory, unique object, or even the exceptional identity and status of being human? Are all of these unique somethings autonomous, true individuals that are wholly themselves? The word individual comes from the Latin to be indivisible. The difficulty here, and again, I'm anticipating the so what of this argument's direction, is whether we hold to the binary adjudication of truth versus error, in this case, matter versus what is not matter, or whether we consider that perhaps life is more intertwined, ambiguous, and recalcitrant, refusing to conform to such either-or definitions. Given the current tendency to read binary oppositions as moral and political cartoons that we can diagnose and reject, and there is good reason to engage the conservative agendas that binarity promotes, I'd be surprised if we didn't refuse the binary in preference for entanglement, a favoured word in new materialist arguments. But here is the rub. In doing this, don't we assume that our choice is better, more progressed, closer to the truth? And isn't the logical rhythm of such progressivist narratives something we also want to consider? The appeal of the new, the now, that works to erase or diminish what it replaces, something other, elsewhere, gone, something that escapes entanglement entirely? Instead of a past that remains alive in the now, indeed, we could even suggest that the past reconfigures itself as the now, for better and for worse. It instead appears comparatively deficient, primitive, foolish, and naive. We've moved on. And if we consider the ways in which indigeneity, woman, and all the other others that are easily feminized and aligned with corporeal immanence and nature as less progressed, then challenging this logic is imperative. But this is hard to do because those ideas and behaviours we hope to debunk and destroy can surreptitiously reappear in our own pronouncements. As noted above, the inescapable dynamic is the enduring rhythm of binarisation that actually underpins our decision to refuse the errors and simplifications of binarity. In other words, when you're against binarisms, in a way, that's also a binary. So critique is entirely within binarity. And this unwitting repetition is inevitable when we assume that difference signifies distance from, and this and not that, thereby perpetuating an atomistic understanding of identity that discounts the cascading histories and cross-contaminations that make it possible. What to do? Let's flag this dilemma wherein identity of any sort, person, creature, thing, appears independent and separated from its context, a standalone entity, at the same time as it is entangled within whatever that context of otherness evokes. We'll return to this. As we try to define new materialism's concerns and approaches, we realise that the nature of matter provokes questions about the matter of nature. Grappling with this concern delivers different perspectives, emphases, irritations, and pronouncements. However, as time is short, rather than document oversights and errors, I prefer to work with the more playful aspect of this word's etymology. The word error comes from the Latin errare, to wander. If we approach new materialism with an adventurous optimism, we might arrive somewhere both surprising and unpredictable, but also, at least to my mind, strangely anticipated. And this place, which is as specific as it is general, will provide myriad perspectives on why the conventional adjudication of truth versus error, or even the apportioning of creativity to a particular artist or author, an apportioning that defines invention and artistry as capacities that originate in one individual, could be reconfigured in quite wild, indeed more generous and ecological ways. Because when I say artist, it goes without saying that I mean a human artist. And given the of course of this assumption, what I want to ask becomes tricky, if not impossible. Namely, could the artifact, the art object or creative outcome be an active agent in its own genesis? You can see the difficulty as I attempt to speculate about something that reverses the sequential and agential direction of what makes sense, cause to effect, author to authored, subjective energy and ingenuity to passive result. More challenging in this reversal is its displacement of the human as the one whose ingenuity intends or brings about the desired result. And this is an important twist because human exceptionalism is much criticised in new materialist debate. But let's begin more slowly because achieving a reversal isn't the end game in this meditation. New materialism's major intervention has been to open the question of matter and nature in ways that refuse cultural solipsism. I say this because the most popular theoretical methodology against which new materialist practitioners take issue is cultural construction, or the linguistic turn. According to this view, nature and culture are quite separate systems. And because being human is made synonymous with a unique capacity to use abstract language and media technologies that represent or stand in for the world, these complex interpretive reinventions secure human identity as exceptional because unnatural. Recall eyewitness testimony and our faith that what is right before our eyes is unarguable. For cultural constructionists, there are no real surprises in this revelation, because what makes us human is an inability to access the raw and unmediated truth of nature. In other words, although we all see and experience nature, or so we think, in truth, one apprehends the irony here, nature is really culture in disguise, and that's why the word requires inverted commas. I want to share part of a conversation that captures this style of thinking, not only because it illustrates what, to my mind, its inadvertent pomposities are regarding human exceptionalism, but also because it provides a pointer towards less trodden paths of inquiry. My hope was to challenge the notion that language is a uniquely human technology, a sign of supreme intelligence, and to at least suggest that the ubiquity of something that seems to function like a human language might challenge the nature culture non-human, comparatively deficient and inaccessible versus human in a world of our own making standoff. My interlocutor is Judith Butler, an eminent scholar in this field whose work has been transformative for political debate on several registers. Importantly, my criticisms are not intended to subtract from her achievements, but instead to build on and broaden her insights through a more inclusive frame of reference. But first, a detour that will briefly introduce the confusion and collapse to which a linguistic perspective will succumb, and why staying with the trouble, as Donna Haraway encourages us to do, might prove salutary. My interest for many decades has been focused on what for me is a supreme puzzle, language, so I don't assume that it's straightforward as to what it is. The famous Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure tried to unpack the deep mystery of how language functions, outlining specific terms and structures that he hoped would clarify the enigma. The result was a mess of contradictions, and sadly, we know that he began to doubt his sanity as he grappled with what he called this irritating duplicity impossible to pin down. Importantly for us, the problem that beleaguered Saussure is the very same one we are exploring here, namely an inability to discriminate, at least in any final way, between differences. He could certainly name his terms of analysis and separate them, but during the course of his argumentation, these same terms would metamorphose into their opposite. The ideational image became material, the signifier became the signified. The signified was confused with the sign assumed the status of the referent, and the referent appeared as an extra-linguistic reality to which, according to Saussure, and as Butler would later claim, there could be no access. And yet I've never regarded Saussure's work as simply wrong, but rather as a testament to something elusive, something whose implications and intricacies comprehend whatever we might define language against, namely an outsider and not this, and ultimately nature. With such considerations as my inspiration, in short, a sense that nature, without inverted commas, writes and interprets, that we humans are immersed thoroughly in the life around us and have never been cut adrift, I pose the following question to Butler. My question is, there is a serious suggestion that life itself is creative encryption. Does your understanding of language and discourse extend to the workings of biological codes and their apparent intelligence? I was thinking of the code cracking and encryption capacities of bacteria at the time and the histories of communication inside a virus that diarise where it has been. And I mean, certainly with COVID, the whole process of, trying to find where a particular, infection has come from it really brings that home. Butler is well aware that my question harbours a dangerous intent and reminds me that language is a cultural artefact, a properly human artefact. And by dint of human exceptionalism, our attempts to understand nature will always be a failed project. We will be familiar with this perspective in accusations of anthropomorphism. If we see human complexities in the animal or even the vegetal world, according to more recent research, we have merely projected what is unique to our own behaviours and motivations onto a nature that is less evolved, incapable. To confuse the two would be to question not only what is exceptional about human identity, but also the nature of nature itself. Butler responded at length. She said, there are models according to which we might try to understand biology and models by which we might try to understand how genes function. And in some cases, the models are taken to be inherent to the phenomena that is being explained. I'm sure that encryption can be used as a metaphor or model by which to understand biological processes, especially cell reproduction. But do we then make the move to render what is useful as an explanatory model into the ontology of biology itself? This worries me, especially when it is mechanistic models which lay discursive claims on biological life. What if life exceeds the model? When does the discourse claim to become the very life it purports to explain? I'm not sure it's possible to say life itself is creative encryption unless we make the mistake of thinking that the model is the ontology of life. Indeed, we might need to think first about the relation of any definition of life to life itself and whether it must, by virtue of its very task, fail. This attempt to hold the line is exemplary of linguisticism or cultural construction, with its insistence that nature, or reality as we generally understand it, is just a sign of reality and not reality itself. And if we only have signs, models, and representations of a world whose substantive truth is elsewhere, then we remain deluded by the representations we produce that must fail to measure up. Unsurprisingly, cultural construction has always been nervous about scientific endeavour and its findings. Let's consider the example of artificial intelligence systems, models that work with mathematical algorithms. How can the seemingly abstract and random notations of mathematics have predictive power about a world that isn't already numerate? For example, how can algorithms point their metaphorical finger through layers of forensic inquiry, facial recognition and reconstruction, genetic analysis, fingerprint examination, locating the crime scenes from the testimonies of insects, soil minerals and vegetable witnesses that together agree here in this specific place and at this time of the year, this unique event occurred. How does a single strand of hair left randomly at a crime scene provide a name, attest to drugs taken months before, speak about an absent person's health and dietary choices and where they lived for the past several months? Every place has a signature written by the chemical composition of that particular environment. And this means that a diversity of seemingly random things can individuate themselves into this particular and unique something. To explain this evidence away as just a lucky metaphor, the fantasies of anthropocentrism at its most naive forbids curiosity about the how of its workability. In Butler's reading, nature assumes a transcendental status, becoming an absolute and impassive touchstone that appears relatively fixed. Its substantive materiality is something that being human can neither know nor be. However, at a time when we experience the devastating consequences of global warming, species loss, and ecological degradation, we can surely appreciate why a movement such as new materialism might reject the exclusion of nature as an active agent in who we are and how we live. I've argued elsewhere that new materialism, in the main, strives to acknowledge nature as well as scientific and cultural insight by adding their differences into the analytical mix. In other words, the emission of nature and the weight of material life is resolved, in new materialism, I'd say, by including what is specific to their respective identities and distributing their constitutive input more evenly. However, by adding differences together, 1 + 1 + 1 and so on, we avoid the more maddening riddle wherein identity of any sort is fraught from the start, already alive to an otherness that has yet to be added. I suspect that culture retains its integrity against nature because we witness movement, even paradox and perversity in cultural evidence, and we just cannot conceive that nature could involve these same dynamic and conflicting forces. Also, the dividing border keeps human exceptionalism intact. It becomes difficult to consider evidence of consciousness and intentional agency throughout nature if the definition of being human forbids it. And yet, despite these difficulties, there are ways through the apparent impasse. Let's recall that for Butler, nature was really culture, which means that the political denigration of the negative as lacking, its identity associated with my primordiality and incapacity, can be rejected as prejudice and ideology. And that's obviously, crucially important. Saussure also discovered evidence of collapse and confusion between one thing and another, and to such an extent that he couldn't secure the language system from the material world outside. These examples of identity's ability to morph into its opposite are usually read as mistakes, even if inevitable ones. Indeed, Butler claims the mistake as definitional for culture, and we could add Jacques Lacan's mirror stage thesis here, in which misrecognition is the necessary dynamic that enables human psychic life and our sense of self. Unlike Butler and Lacan, whose segregation of culture from what came before is unquestioned, Saussure remained perplexed by the apparent ubiquity of language and its transformativity, deciding that linguistics was some sort of sub-branch of an all-encompassing system, which he calls semiology. Importantly for this argument, Jacques Derrida reimagines this general system of entanglement, or intratextuality, as he calls it, arguing that language isn't something enclosed against life. Rather, life is an involvement of literacies whose intra-activities generate individuation through and as systematicity. That's quite a mouthful, so maybe you'll ask me about that. As time is short, I'm going to cut to the chase, accepting Butler's insistence that nature is really culture, but reversing her prohibitive division. I'm going to say that culture was always nature. And the question is, what have I forfeited in doing this? If there is no outside of nature, no radical break between one system and another, then cultural construction's appreciation of the world's more plastic configurations, its interpretability and transformativity is generalized rather than sacrificed. Whereas
it's 7:30.
Whereas nature was previously positioned as untouchable, outside, its actions prescribed and programmed, by God, it now becomes an ecological dynamic. Hence, I'm not so much in nature, as though nature is a context around me, as I am a unique expression of what nature makes possible as it represents itself to itself. Just as a human subject is a site of contradictory claims, rememorations that confuse and transform past recollections into contemporary experiences, indeed, others' recollections from elsewhere into one's own, we should take this as an instantiation of nature's own operational complexity and very often its agonistics. New materialism's interventionary direction remains interesting if we maintain pressure on its terms of reference. It is not necessarily better than the last perspective or theory, by dint of time's passing, inevitably new and improved as a relentless rhythm of critique would have it, but it does encourage inquiry and uncertainty about subjects we might otherwise rule out of order. My own intellectual trajectory into the puzzle of materiality makes the point that these concerns are hardly new. As a student in the 1980s and 1990s, I was lucky enough to study with Elizabeth Gross and Moira Gatens, Australian feminists who brought considerable attention to the mind-body problem. I began to wonder about the difference between biology and cultural interpretation, or how biology could respond to and enact social and political signs. As an anthropology student, I was aware that biologies are culturally inflected. Pain, pleasure, and sexual gratification can vary dramatically. The biology of audition is attuned to the specific intricacies of national languages and musical notation. Belief systems or the special significance of marks on a page have the power to stop the heart, and so on. I was still thinking of culture as something separate, the agent of change outside the body that somehow inscribes flesh. But what did it mean to suggest that biology was receptive and able to interpret the message, read the signs, and perform them accordingly? And why do we assume that culture, as we experience and make it, is external to our material life? The more I ask where matter begins and ends, given that words and images, representations and ideas can be biologically incorporated, conversion hysteria is an especially dramatic example of this, I felt that the difference between nature and culture wasn't at all clear. To consider why identity includes what it is defined against, we can flip the conventional causal direction of culture with its sense of inscribing or interpreting nature and consider the object, here nature, as the subject, agent, culture. As we saw in the case of Butler's conclusion, nature is really culture in disguise, and Saussure's confusion, a circumscribed system of language has turned into an extra-linguistic material reality, we witness how a general force field, call it language, call it nature, or even ecology, distinguishes itself into apparently segregated entities that remain constitutively involved. When we do this, what seems to come first to be so obviously primordial and less developed than what purportedly comes later begins to shapeshift. I'm made to pause and reconsider as I write this, or actually here as I read this. Who or what is crafting this argument? Don't we tend to imagine a sort of homunculus or me bubble somewhere, maybe in the brain and yet somehow not tissue, because surely my personhood can't be the bloody gloop that would spill out if I suffered a head trauma, even though I know this to be true. If I think about corporeality and the material stuff of biology, then I have to concede that my sense of self and subjectivity, intelligence and thoughtfulness, the living emotional landscape of my life and memories, my personality, what I might think of as the essence of me-ness, inhere within the very meat of my being. Understandably, we remain perplexed or even repelled by the suggestion that the pulsing and oozing, the electrical firings, the chattering industry of our organs and bones think, articulate ideas, deceive, love, and imagine. Biology isn't alien to cultural manufacture if it authors and reinvents, if it is the stuff of the ideational, cultural, psychological, and technological. And if there is no outside this scene of intra-active entanglement, then every aspect of our being is an expression of an implicated ecology. Identity and its segregating divisions morph and undo themselves. Their prohibitive lines of containment, both forged and dissolved in the duplicitous mimicry of repetition. Nothing stands still. It might prove useful to conclude this meditation by briefly revisiting the vagaries of subjectivity, in the hope that I've said enough about this mystery to encourage the reader into its labyrinth. What follows is intended as suggestion, a poesis of possibilities where the order of recognized rules and divisions become muddled. We are now moving through the looking glass, even as we stand outside and before it, believing that our integrity is confirmed in our reflection. The mirror's return look allows us to see ourselves from the outside, as if through the eyes of another. Indeed, Lacan argues that the young child has no real sense of itself as someone in a context, someone with a boundary between itself and what is not itself, until it learns to recognize its mirror image. But again, we hit a paradox because what brings the young child into focus involves duplicity rather than duplication. The eyes through which the child sees itself are also outside itself, whether those in the mirror or those of its parents and carers. Thus, the child's identity as a site here in this place involves an errancy, a necessary misrecognition of itself in as the mirror image, there in that place. For Lacan, the confusions that the mirror stage inaugurates are resolved as we acquire language, the stand-in for a world that can only be materialized as signs that register our profound alienation from nature and the non-human world. But what if we read the mirror stage as indicative of nature's own internal playfulness, its own transpositions and metamorphoses? Although Lacan seems to exclude the possibility, I've always wondered if he's having a joke with us on this point, or if he forgets himself, because requiring proof for his argument about what is specific to being human, he references the same behaviours in cicadas, pigeons, and other creatures who require duplicitous reflections to become themselves. More fabulous still is his respectful reference to the work of Roger Caillois, a sociologist who finds human complexities throughout nature. For example, the evolutionary mirror stage of moths involves a perfect mimicry of the bark against which they remain camouflaged. This ability of the moth to become bark, or is it the bark becoming moth, an interactive phenomenon, is normally explained as an evolutionary strategy of survival. And yet Caillois remains unconvinced, noting that the stomachs of these creatures' natural predators are full of them. Why then do the moths do it? Who is their audience? For Caillois, life is chiasmic performance, a concrescence of individuation. I'm here in this, I am the figure in the ground. Yet this will to occupy locatable coordinates of space-time is also caught within a cross-current, an undertow of enticing pleasure that promises spatial dissolution. I am there and I am that. I am not where or what you think me to be. Importantly, Caillois abandons the sense of mimicry as a representational copy, preferring to interrogate identity at its root. Alicia Quade's work, especially the Weltanlinie series in 2017, although similar paradoxes resonate throughout her various installations, leads us through a similar set of quandaries. The work's large frames remind me of Alberti's explorations of perspective during the Renaissance, the single viewpoint and vanishing horizon, reflecting the rise of a commercial class and a central sovereign identity. Alberti's rules haunt Quade's installations because we expect to see them, yet they have been crossed out. Of course, ordinary mirrors can have the same effect when their reflections are juxtaposed, as in an upmarket bathroom with several mirrored walls. Our normal mirror readiness is interrupted. Perhaps we appear lopsided, our mouth drooping strangely at one corner or eyes alarmingly uneven. We're usually blind to such asymmetries in the mirror's normal reversal, repairing the damage and making adjustments in the routine of looking. But the reversal of a reversal takes us aback. Isn't this how others see us? Do I really look like this? Such questions intensify in Quade's maze of me-making as I mistake a mirror for an open space for what I anticipated would be a reflection, the glimpse of another person confused with myself, unexpected objects interrupting the back and forth. And then there is the artist, stationary, staring, an anchoring sentinel perhaps, but all too quickly enveloped by what begins to feel like the flicker effect of film. There is no longer an external and stable frame of reference to contain and manage the instability. Perspective is no longer a point, if it ever was, nor is perception a simple recording, but something scattered, fractured, an externality which is also the stuff of my interiority. Of course, I can't stop the dissemination of my sense of self into the all and the everything. I can stop, the dissemination of my sense of self into the all and the everything, as well as its inverse, if I describe the experience as an illusion. That absolutely stops the mystery and curiosity here. And we have seen the irony in denouncing the all-knowing subject who perceives the truth of the world by a subtle recuperation that knows that it does not know. To describe reality as an illusion from which we cannot escape is to affirm the enduring stability of material reality as that statement's external framing device. Order returns. But what if identity formation remains a curious riddle, an illusory involvement whose ubiquitous crossovers and confusions assume ecological dimension? If the ground of our being comprehends the heavy stones whose spherical beauties somehow float above us, and I mentioned Quade's other work, and if the gravitas of words can stop our hearts, are we upside down, right side up, under our feet or on a page? Do we have a choice? In a New York Times article on Quade, Thomas Rogers quotes the artist as saying, "I don't believe in any firm truths." He goes on to describe the scene of their encounter. Looking around her studio kitchen, she pointed out a lesson in molecular physics. What we observe to be hard surfaces, such as a wooden tabletop, are in fact made primarily of empty atoms. She asserted that her art is an attempt to find out what that which we call reality actually is. With this scene in mind, I refer the reader to a sustained and detailed argument by particle physicist, feminist and critical theorist Karen Barad in her book, Meeting the Universe Halfway, Quantum Physics and the Entanglement of Matter and Meaning. Barad's work is especially admired among many new materialist practitioners for the way it distributes agency and undoes our conventional notion of identity as atomic and independent. Interestingly, Quade's skepticism that perhaps the received familiarity of our world, its rules and orderings, are more alien than they seem is endorsed in Barad's thesis. For Barad, identity of any sort is phenomenon, diffracted, interactive, such that the difference between representation and physical stuff is no difference at all. She draws heavily on the work of Niels Bohr, whose central point was that the objects and the agencies of observation are inseparable parts of a single phenomenon. What especially charms me about this entangled puzzle is that it resonates with the disorienting maze in which Saussure found himself. Perhaps he was not so mad after all. I leave you with Barad's version of the conundrum. She says, because let's understand that all of the cultural constructionist work, it all rests on the notion of mediation. which also implies that there are identities being mediated. She says, rather blasphemously, agential realism denies the suggestion that our access to the world is mediated, whether by consciousness, experience, language, or any other alleged medium. Rather like the special theory of relativity, agential realism calls into question the presumption that a medium, an ether, is even necessary. Okay, that's me done.
Thank you, Vicki. It's hard to tell who's there, how many of you are watching. And I've read this so many times, also read multiple books. So it's a time for others to ask questions. And maybe I will keep an eye on my phone in case they come running through. And maybe until then, we can kick off the conversation. Vicki, what do you think?
Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah.
Sounds good. I mean, there was already a point earlier on when we were reading, you said, oh, that's a mouthful, maybe we can go back to it. I might briefly open that up and try to kind of open it up a bit more. One sec.
Yeah, tell me what page it's on.
Oh, sure. So I think it is, 1 second. It was the bit with Derrida. Yeah, perfect. So I think it is on page 6, towards the right.
Page 6?
6 of 11, or if you have the actual book, I think it is 109.
190.
Yeah, my scan doesn't show the the last digit, so it could be 100 and I think it is 189 then.
Okay.
Amazing. So it's the second column on the right towards the end, where it says the paragraph before the last. Derrida reimagines this general system of entanglement or intertextuality, arguing that language isn't something enclosed against life. Rather, life is an involvement of literacies whose interactivities generate individuation through and as systematicity. I think this was the bit where you said, oh, that's a mouthful, we should go back to it.
Yeah, for some reason I can't find it. But I can go with what you said, even though I can't.
No, I can help. So are you on page
188?
189. Yeah, and then 189.
Then I go to 189.
Yeah.
And I
towards the end of the page.
On the second column.
Yeah. And just before the last paragraph, the last 5-6 sentences, I think.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, got it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that kind of opens up some of the kind of influences in your thinking anyway, so it would be a good opportunity to meet out what you mean there. But I think you're frozen for me. Oh yeah, you're back.
Am I back?
I don't know if I don't. Yeah, you're back.
Well, let's say when Derrida says there's no outside of text, most people hear that to me, they have a certain understanding of text, and they mean the words that you might see inside a book, or they might extend a representation to images, because after all, words are images. And so basically people assume it means you can't get outside the hermeneutic circle of human interpretation and its various symbols. But that's not what, I mean, I always think, I wish people would actually read Derrida, because the notion of textuality for him and the notion of language, it's, as it is with Saussure, it comes down to the problematic of difference. Now, when Saussure said, because he had all these structures and words, he had the whole thing, and in the end, he's going insane, and he says, language is difference. And that's the riddle, because you can say, oh, okay, well, difference, well, what difference of this from this? Whatever the this is that you want to fasten on, that's already language. That's already the question of language. So it's just the riddle of it. And that's why Derrida comes along, and instead of assuming that difference is something that is the space between us, say you and me, so it's just a nothing, Derrida comes along and he says, différence, which he spells differently, even though it sounds the same, because he's saying you won't get an entity that is self-contained like an atom, that the nature of what he's calling a system, that's why I think the word language throws people off. There's nothing but, entangled implication and so on, not simply of me and you as though we pre-exist the question of entanglement, but there's something about the very possibility of me and you, and this is where it sounds so bizarre, where I can't be me unless I am an expression of a general entanglement, which is all inclusive. And that's, to me, that's why I'm calling it an ecology, because it isn't how am I connected to this, it's that I am that. I don't know, that's probably not helping.
No, it was, because it was just bringing back this bit of text that I really like. It says, I'm not so much in nature as I am a unique expression of what nature makes possible as it really represents itself to itself. So I think it was basically something in the text that struck me as well. And I had like a slightly, I'm keeping an eye on the phone, there isn't anything there, so maybe we can keep going for 9 minutes. I had a slightly fun question to speculate about. Which was, you remember how you start the text with the court, basically the wrong evidence is the one that are given in good faith. I was slightly imagining what would a court look like if we all acknowledged that we were representations of nature itself, and we all kind of understood that I just wanted to imagine and speculate with you together, how would that court case look like?
Well, that is a fascinating question. I'm not assuming that what I'm arguing, where one would move aside life as we live it and then in would come some other thing. You're actually always going to be looking at the life that you're living, because this is the stuff that's already there. And it occurs to me, because obviously I think there's a problem with courts, even though I agree, it's a matter of, well, okay, but what are we going to do about it? How do we move with it? Where the sovereign subject is assumed in a court. You are assumed to be the agent of your own life. You have full responsibility, so that anything you do, if it crosses the law, if it's a criminal act, the assumption is you are responsible. And it begins with you. So you author your own life. That's the assumption of the law. If you can be proved to be mad, then you're not culpable. So there is that sense of a Cartesian subject is what the law assumes. Although it does ameliorate that, in as much as, people can put up arguments that they were treated so badly, they didn't know the difference and so on. And this probably, what I'm about to say probably won't make me very popular, but if I take something like, because we're in the middle at the moment in Australia of a lot of argument around domestic violence. And the way the arguments go, and of course, I'm totally sympathetic. We have no real support for women. We have some, but it's rubbish. And so what tends to happen is people look to the perpetrators as the problem. They're the cause of domestic violence, and then that's the end of it. So that you've got to have more, shelters for women. You need this, you need that, and so on. In another sense, they're not the cause. Obviously, I want those men, I want those men dealt with. They should be charged with those acts of violence and so on. But the real question is, what's causing that in men? So I think it would shift the law. And the law actually is always doing this, it seems to me. The better people in the law who are trying to show a more complex understanding of the mode of production of behaviours are always looking for a bigger picture. And I think if you don't have that, then in the case, let's say, of Australian Indigenous people, in the case of violence, you'd be saying, well, there's something wrong with a lot of them because so many of them are violent or locked up. So unless you keep moving it back to, in a way, what is the ecology, the forces that produce those behaviours, and that will include white colonialism, then you isolate these behaviours as though they stand alone. So I think it's a really good question, because I think if I was working in the law, I'd want to keep rolling back. Where does the frame of the act begin and end? And I realise you have to draw a line, but so often, even with recently the stuff that feminists are doing around domestic violence, I want the men included in the dilemma, not just seen as perpetrators, because it seems to me it's a rolling thing. They're also victims of something else. So I think the law question is it's pragmatic. It's on the ground. You can see things happening, and you could, and certainly there are a lot of programs for men, but I think there has to be more of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it really fleshes out this bit of the text from what you've just read in a very pragmatic and day-to-day and contemporary way as well. As noted above, the inescapable dynamic is the enduring rhythm of binarization that actually underpins our decision to refuse the errors and simplifications of binary. So in a way, what you're suggesting is a more complex picture with different fields coming together. So perhaps to answer the question I asked, the ideal court case would be that of maybe similar to your text, interdisciplinary approach, where there would be a room where we are analyzing sociologically, where there will be a room looking at anthropologically, gender studies, and maybe then there's the court case in the middle. I think that would maybe a slower trial as well, where we get to actually slow down and just unpick what is going on in a more sustainable way. I think you mentioned you mentioned that I would share your email address, which is a very kind of, in case others have emails or questions they would like to direct to. I'll just get the email address out. One sec. So yeah, anyone watching but haven't been able to come up with a question but would like to email Vicki, Vicki's email address is v.kirby, I will say that again, v.kirby@unsw.edu.au. This sounds like I'm on the phone, like trying to spell my name, but I'll say it again to make sure everyone can get it, those interested. Sorry,
maybe you can put it in the chat. Can they all see?
Yeah, but nobody's in the chat, Vicki. It's just me and you and Salt. Or maybe they can see it. I'm not sure. I mean, anyways, we'll find a way, but I'll just make sure that they can write it down with pen and pencil or in their computers. v.kirby@unsw.edu.au. Okay, amazing. So I think this brings us to the end of the first session, which was such an honor. And knowing that this reading and this conversation will stay online for others who might want to think about such issues is just great. But yeah, I'll wrap up now and I'll see you in another Zoom link with the closed study group. And before that, a little plug-in. Next week, I'll be joined by artist, writer, translator, educator Merve Ünsal. It will be open as well in Turkish, anyone wants to join in. And on 7th of June, I believe, I'll be joined by Fred Moten and Stefano Harni, where we'll be unpacking more of like uncommunicability, language, music, and how to go about talking when maybe talking is not what we might want to do, or is it adequate to express what we might want to express with. Anyways, thank you so much, Vicki, really, and thank you those listening, giving your attention to another digital event. And Salt, Sizin, Onur, Mustafa.
Wait. Are you going to send me another link, a different link?
I think Onur sent it, but I'll resend it again. But I think you might need to leave this one so we're out of the live stream.
I'm now leaving this.
Yeah, I will leave too, and I will email you the second link.
See you.
Bye everyone. Nice to see you. See you next week.